Unfortunately, our world requires hospitals due to the pestilence of nature and man. But fortunately, we have doctors and nurses. While doctors take care of the gritty medical portions, nurses care for the patient, providing excellent service to both the doctor and the patient. To all of the nurses in training, or professional nurses, I salute your services to us. Sadly, people in positions of power could abuse it to fatal results. We see this with police, religious leaders, and even leaders of countries. Even in jobs where one is put in the care of another, morbid results can come from it. This is the story of Honora Kelly, known by her adopted name Jane Topan. But in order to understand her upbringing, one must first understand the anti-Irish sentiment in 19th century America. In 1845, the Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger, began. Being perhaps the only crop that could sustainably grow, potatoes made up the diet of the poor Irish families under British rule. The potatoes were infected with late blight, which causes them to rot and get ugly. Their main food source gone, the Irish people starved. Some Irish people evacuated to other parts of the world for food, and the main place for that was the United States. Unfortunately for the Irish, they would be met with stigma. As the Irish people were mostly Catholic in a Protestant America, the ships they arrived in would be dubbed coffin ships, as the people were either dead, sick, or weak. These new arrivals to the US were seen as dirty and there to steal jobs from Americans. They were undesired. Honora Kelly was a young girl when her mother died from tuberculosis. Her father, Peter Kelly, was a poor, alcoholic tailor who turned her in with her sister Delia into the Boston Female Asylum. They were accepted due to evidence of abuse. It is said that Peter sewed his eyes shut after this. Although probably not true, Peter was known as Kelly the Crack, further cementing that abuse occurred in the Kelly house. Honora entered indentured servitude, which is basically contract slavery, to Anne Toppin, who forced her to drop her Irish accent and to change her name to Jane Toppin, which I'll refer to her as from now on, even though she wasn't adopted. This festered into a hatred for Anne, and eventually Anne's daughter Elizabeth. Jane Toppin was jealous of Elizabeth. Elizabeth was privileged and would have no problems marrying. This jealousy became hatred, even though Elizabeth treated her Jane fairly. Jane was in the service of the Toppin family until she was 18. During that time, she was known for being a liar, but was also able to have many friends. She stayed with the Toppins after her service was over. Anne ended up dying, with Elizabeth taking over the house. Elizabeth then married a man named Oromel Brigham, and Jane stayed with him a bit more, until an unnamed conflict arose between her and the pair. She went to study at Cambridge Hospital. This is where she received the nickname Jolly Jane for her excellent service and work ethic. Her success made other nurses hate her, and although there were nurses who attempted to defame her, Jane managed to twist this in her favor. She got innocent nurses fired, and Jane's sadistic joy over this would disturb her friends. She would practice petty theft at the hospital. This is also the beginning of Jane's killing habits. Jane had a disdain for the elderly, seeing care for them as wasted effort. She began playing with overdosing her patients. Many of her patients died under her care. There wasn't much suspicion due to the compassionate nature she expressed, as well as being a time when hospital deaths were not uncommon. Amelia Finley, one of Jane's patients, managed to survive. She dismissed her encounter with Jane as a fever dream, but once Jane was arrested, Amelia realized her horrifying experience was in fact real. Jane would go on to say that she got sexual gratification from watching her patients in pain from overdosing, and would climb in bed with them. Amelia eventually came out, saying that when Jane was drugging her, Jane climbed into the bed with her and would kiss all over her face. Amelia was saved by the sound of another nurse in the hall, alarming Jane. Too much complaints for Jane eventually saw her discharged from the hospital without her nursing credentials. She joined Massachusetts General, but lost her job for similar reasons. Even so, Jolly Jane was still recommended as a private nurse, to the detriment of the people in her care. Jane delighted in slowly killing her patients by nursing them back to health and overdosing them again until they died. It didn't stop at patients, as she killed a friend to take her position as a dining hall matron, which Jane ended up being fired from soon after. Jane would stay in the Jakin house in Cape Cod when not caring for her patients. She was in debt at this place, but this did not stop her from staying. Eventually, she invited Elizabeth for a visit. Jane treated Elizabeth to a picnic, where she snuck morphine tablets into Elizabeth's water. She called Elizabeth's husband, and continued to slowly inject Elizabeth with more morphine as she held her in her arms. Jane would go on to say that this was the first person she killed with actual hatred and purpose. She would then kill members of the Davis family, the people she cared for while in the Jakin house. One day, Maddie Davis came to collect the debt, where Jane poisoned her. She would kill Maddie's daughters too, and reportedly cuddled the son of the oldest daughter as the poor kid's mother was dying. Alden, Maddie's husband, was the last one left. He suffered from insomnia after his wife's death, which was to his benefit when Jane attempted to burn the house down to eliminate her records of debt. Eventually, she decided to overdose the man. After this, she left to seduce Elizabeth's husband, Oromel. She tried to poison him and then nurse him back to health, but he made it clear that he didn't want Jane. After this, Jane attempted to kill herself with morphine, but in some strange irony, she failed. She was sent to the hospital in order to heal her from her overdose, but she attempted to overdose again. At this time, investigations of the murder of the Davis family were occurring, and she was arrested. She was found insane. She claimed to have taken up to 100 lives, and stated her goal was to kill more than any single man or woman has ever killed before. She also stated that she knew what she was doing was wrong. When in an insane asylum, Jane was afraid to eat food, fearing it was poisoned. She spent the rest of her life there, and there are accounts of her calling attendants into her room and trying to convince them to help her kill patients at the hospital. She is like many serial killers in that she had a rough childhood. While deemed insane, her actions have shown purpose on several occasions, and her erotic tendencies with her dying victims make for a horrifying read. Earlier, I mentioned her sister Delia. What happened to her? She became an alcoholic prostitute. The Kelly family was struck with misfortune at every step of the way. A dead mother, an abusive crazed father, an uncaring caretaker who hated her for simply being Irish. I wonder, if all of this could have been avoided, what if her mother never died? What if her father wasn't abusive? Would Delia and Honora, forever known as Jolly Jane, have turned out any better? We'll simply never know.